UFC Vegas 52, DraftKings has released the salary so we could take our first look. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. Last week was solid. We had a lot of straight bets cash. From a DraftKings perspective, one thing that really sunk me was trying to get leverage by going Baeza over Fiallo. Miguel Baeza let us down again. Now this week we have a card that's but we're going to break it down and we're going to make some money this week because these are the kind of cards that are easiest to predict, easiest to call, and we're going to have a lot of fun this week. And we're going to start the breakdown at the top of the slate. As always, we have the UFC debut this week of Dean Barry. He's going to be fighting the returning Mike Jackson, the legend Mike Jackson. Right now, Dean Barry is a minus 1,200 favorite on some books, and he should look like it this week when he runs through Mike Jackson in the first round. Mike Jackson is 37. He hasn't fought since 2018, and that was a fight against CM Punk, which means nothing. Now, Dean Barry is going to be 9,500 on this slate, but we keep learning week in and week out that the highest priced fighter, that price tag may look like a deterrent, but it really shouldn't be. Last week, I stayed away from Drakkar Klose because I thought, oh, Drakkar Klose, he always goes to decision. Way too expensive this week, and then he put up 1,000 DraftKings points. This has happened several times this year where the highest priced fighter on the slate performs like it from a DraftKings perspective. So we're going to learn from this mistake, and we're going to do our best to get Dean Barry into our lineups this week. And there are some underdogs this week that I think have a legitimate chance of winning. So I think we're going to be able to get him in our lineups pretty comfortably. And I think we have to get here just because he has the best matchup on the slate. I think we see him get a knockdown plus a first round finish. So Dean Barry in this spot, he pays off his price tag. And again, there are some underdogs on this slate I really like that'll help us get here. So the pick for me for this fight is Dean Barry by knockout inside of the first round. At the time of recording this, there isn't a line for a first round knockout, but the under 1.5 is set at minus 125. That's probably the route that I'm going to go this week because I would never bet anybody at minus 1,000, minus 1,200, not even put them in a parlay. It's not worth it. But the under 1.5 rounds is where I end up going this week. I've already placed a bet on it. Next, we have the return of Tyson Pedro. He has been out of action for quite a while. He's going to be fighting Ike Villanueva this week. Tyson Pedro hasn't seen octagon action since the end of 2018, where he was knocked out by a then 37-year-old Shogun. And earlier that year, he was finished by OSP inside of the first round. Tyson Pedro, Aquaman stunt double, he's coming in at 3-3 in the UFC, so he's not exactly world class. He's not a top of the division caliber guy, but I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Come here. Bring it in. Closer. Oscar, the lights. If I have to remind you again, I'm going to kick your ass. Anyway, bring it in. Ike Villanueva is the worst fighter on the roster. He's 1-4 in the UFC, and he's been finished in every loss that he's had. He's 38. He doesn't really take a punch well, and he doesn't seem like the most athletic guy. If I had to guess, Ike Villanueva's 40-yard dash time is probably somewhere in the high 8-minute range. And yes, Villanueva has power, but he has power in the way that a light heavyweight who throws everything into his hooks has power, so I'm not really sold on the puncher's chance here. I expect Tyson Pedro to find a takedown early, get the back, find a rear naked choke. It's just what he does. He's a slick submission artist when he's able to get going. And I see this finish coming in the opening round, at the latest in the second round. And with your lineups, if you're finding that you're having trouble affording Dean Barry, I think that Tyson Pedro is a fine second option. He's a minus 575 favorite, so the best way to attack this is kind of like what we saw in the last fight, is just under 1.5 rounds, which sits at minus 165. If you parlay that with the under 1.5 rounds for Dean Barry, that comes out to about 2-1, which I think is a smart way to invest your money this week. I haven't taken that one specifically. I did take the under in this fight. I haven't parlayed them together, but I think that the most likely outcome is Tyson Pedro by submission inside of the first round. Next, we have Qileng. He's going to be fighting Cameron Else this week. Now, let me just pause for a second. If you're hearing some of the names that I've rattled off so far and you're thinking, who are you people? I don't blame you. The UFC puts on a handful of events like this each year, and we kind of just have to deal with it. But UFC 274 is right around the corner. It's absolutely stacked. So We just need to fill up on bread for now while the surf and turf is being prepared in the other room. Now, Qileng, he is 0-2 in the UFC. He really hasn't looked great, but he hasn't looked terrible either. In his UFC debut, he fought Jeff Molina, who we know is pretty solid, and Jeff Molina landed nearly 200 strikes on him, knocked him down twice, and after that we saw him get ragged by Cody Durden for most of their fight. The positive that you can take away from both of those fights are that he stayed in them, and he fought hard the whole 15 minutes, or as hard as he could. You know, both of these fights were pretty one-way traffic, but he didn't give up on himself. On the other side, we have Cameron Else, who's 0-1 in the UFC. His debut was against Kyler Phillips, who is a strong prospect in the division, but he really did struggle in that fight. So we have a situation here with Qileng, who isn't really that good, but he's not going to give up on himself and he'll fight for 15 minutes. And then Cameron Else, who is pretty solid, but only for those first 5. After that, he will give up. And when you look at who Cameron Else has fought outside of the UFC, it's pretty low-level competition, very inexperienced fighters that he's been up against. And he's fighting Qileng, who does have a lot of experience, and if you look at him, I mean, he looks like the oldest 28-year-old alive. Like, if he's 28 years old, I'm 13. But with over 30 professional fights, I think he has the experience to get it done in this spot. I do expect him to find a finish late after Cameron Else gasses out, so it's probably going to come toward the end of round 2 or somewhere in the 3rd round when Else decides that he's ready to go home. So the pick for this fight for me is Qileng inside the distance, but I do think this goes beyond the first round. The over 1.5 rounds looks like the best place to land on this fight if you're going to bet the rounds. I've already placed a bet on that myself. Let's go! Next at 9,000, we have Maycee Barber. She's going to be fighting Montana De La Rosa this week, and I really like the Maycee Barber side here. Barber is coming off a split decision win over Miranda Maverick, and I know that a lot of people were screaming robbery when that was over. When I was watching live, I did score it for Maycee Barber. But full transparency, I had a bet on Maycee Barber, and y'all know how that goes. If you have a close fight and your money's on one side, the punches seem a little bit harder. The moments of success seem a little bit more impactful. But regardless, she avoids a 3-fight losing streak, and she fights one of the stronger prospects in the division in Miranda Maverick. Now in this fight, I expect Maycee Barber to beat Montana De La Rosa on the basis that she's probably physically stronger, strikes more aggressively, and is athletic enough to maybe not win the grappling exchanges, but definitely not be dominated during them. From a DraftKings perspective, when she's finding the finish, she's scoring a ton of points, right? That's normally how it goes. But we saw, just like in her last fight, if she isn't able to get a bunch of takedowns, if she isn't able to find the knockout, then her score isn't going to be that high. She's going to be relatively low output. You could expect a lot of fence control, you can expect a lot of clinching, and when you put her resume side by side with Maycee Barber, I don't think she wins a lot of the fights that we've seen Maycee Barber win, like for example JJ Aldrich or Miranda Maverick, who by the way also fight out of Elevation Fight Team. So right now the future is 2-0 against Elevation, looking to make it 3-0 this week, and I think she gets it done. So the pick for this fight for me is Maycee Barber by decision. Next, we have our main event favorite, Jessica Andrade. She's 8,900 and she's going to be fighting Amanda Lemos this week. She's going to be looking to stop Amanda Lemos, who's on a 5-fight win streak and has looked very solid in the UFC. Oftentimes when we're talking about women's MMA, just like in the last fight that we just broke down, we favor the fighter that's physically stronger, more aggressive, and with better experience, and normally it's in that order. Jessica Andrade, almost more than anybody on the roster in this division, checks off the boxes in a big way. She's a destroyer at this weight class. She probably hits harder than anybody at this weight class. She's probably the strongest fighter in the division, and she's fought the absolute best female fighters the UFC has to offer. I know publicly she's getting a lot of love, and honestly, when I first saw that this was booked, I thought Jessica Andrade all day, every day, but I honestly think that she's losing this fight, and let me tell you why. Amanda Lemos, I'm actually going to go down to her while I break this down for you. She's going to have a 3-inch height advantage and a 3-inch reach advantage. And not only does she have those physical advantages, but she has a sniper rifle of a straight punch that she'll be able to find a home for against Andrade. If we look at Amanda Lemos' career in the UFC, she loses her debut to Leslie Smith. She gets finished in the 2nd round. that was her UFC debut. But after that, she's been perfect. She had a first round submission over Miranda Granger, then she had 2 decisions and 2 knockouts since then. Now, when you look at her 4 fights outside of that round 1 submission that she got over Granger, they all have the same thing in common. In these last 4 fights, she's scored at least 1 knockdown, and we know that a knockdown is the highest scoring metric on DraftKings. She has 1 here, 2 here, 1 here, 1 here. The power and the placement of her punches is very, very real. It's very underrated, and I expect it to give Andrade trouble this week. We've seen Andrade rocked and dropped in the past. She's a beast of a woman at her weight class, but she's not untouchable by any means. And now I don't want to disrespect Jessica Andrade because she is a legend for this game. She is a legend in women's MMA, but when you look at some of her recent finishes, there really isn't much to go off of. It's not telling you much. She finishes Cynthia Calvillo, who I think we know at this point really isn't all that good. Gets smushed by Valentina Shevchenko, no shame in that. She gets a round 1 finish over Katlyn Chookagian, and some people might look at this knockout and think, oh my gosh, that's incredible. But she landed a body shot. Now that's pretty random, right? Fighters throw body shots all the time, and sometimes it just turns somebody off, and she happened to land a hook to Katlyn Chookagian that night that made her curl up like fried shrimp. But body shot finishes are pretty random in MMA. She loses a decision to Rose, where she actually fought hard the whole time, so I respect that effort. She gets smoked by Weili Zhang, and that's what gives me pause here, just how she responded to the 1 punch right in the beginning of the fight. She shows a knockout win over Rose Namajunas. If you watch this fight, Rose was piecing her up and held on to a defensive Kimura for too long, got slammed on her head. Very, very random, and more importantly, very fluky. She knocks out Karolina Kowalkiewicz, who, when we talk about women's MMA, physicality is a huge thing. Karolina is not physical at all, and we saw that after she challenged Joanna for the title, she went downhill. So while Andrade is a legend for women's MMA, I like the other side of this matchup just for the leverage. I think a lot of people are going to be on Andrade this week, and I think that Lemos has the tools to get it done and has the tools to really surprise Andrade on the feet with her power, her placement, and her speed. Now, if this fight goes the distance, which most women's MMA fights have this year, if you go back and look, it's like 70+%, then I do expect Andrade to win. But I think if Amanda Lemos wins, it's going to be inside the distance, probably inside rounds 1, 2, or 3, which makes her an attractive option personally for me on DraftKings. So the pick for me for this fight is Amanda Lemos inside the distance. Next at 8,700, we have Manel Kape. He's going to be fighting Su Mudaerji this week. Manel Kape, and you'll hear this probably on every breakdown. You've heard this when I've broken down Manel Kape in the past, but he was dealt a very tough hand coming into the UFC. He makes his debut against Alex Pantoja, who's one of the best in the division, and then Mateus Nicolau, who's also surging through the division as well. So after his first 2 fights, it was a little scary. There was some thought that maybe we're getting catfished here. But since these 2 fights, he has 2 back-to-back first-round finishes, and he looks like he's really hitting his stride in the UFC. On the other side, you have Su Mudaerji. He's looked good in the UFC recently, but he does have a loss to Luis Smolka. I really struggle to see where Su Mudaerji wins this fight. Manel Kape is not the kind of guy you can stand and trade with, and he's a big dude for the division and a potent knockout artist. So if he's going to try to stand across from him, he's probably going to have an early night. On the flip side of that, all of Su Mudaerji's losses have come by way of submission. So if he's losing on the feet and decides to shoot for a takedown,
oh, you're a wrestler now.
Might find himself tapping like chicken once again, and we have another victory for Starboy Manel Kape. I think Kape has the tools to get it done this week. I think he has multiple paths to victory, and I don't think Su Mudaerji is dangerous enough to find a finish of his own. So the pick for me for this fight is Manel Kape inside the distance. Next at 8,600, we have Marc-Andre Barriault. He's going to be fighting Jourdain Wright this week. Now, Barriault is only 2 months removed from getting one-tapped by Chidi Njokuani, and he's taking this fight on short notice as well. And one thing that isn't talked much about in this space are fighters' finances. And when I say this space, I mean like prediction videos, DFS content. When you look at Barriault's record and when he's fought, typically there's several months in between his fights. So you have to ask yourself, why would he take a fight just 2 months after taking the worst damage he's ever taken inside the octagon? It's because he needs the money. For those of you that don't know, the way that UFC pays their fighters is you basically get a certain amount of money for showing up and a certain amount of money for winning. It's actually the same amount for most people. So if he gets, say, $20,000 to show up and actually compete, and he gets another $20,000 to win, he's made $40,000. Meaning that if a fighter were to lose, they basically are going to make half of the money that they planned to make because nobody plans to lose. And Marc-Andre Barriault fights out of Quebec, Canada. So let me give you a quick geography lesson. This is where he lives. This is where he trains. I don't know exactly where in here that's happening. I don't care that much to look, but I know that it's here. This is that Quebec region. He's fighting in Vegas. These are where the fights are taking place. This is a long plane ride. You have to pay for travel, hotel, food. You have to pay for your coaches. These aren't just things that the UFC are going to cover for you. So there's a lot that goes into these fighters making the walk and showing up to compete. There's a lot of things that need to be paid for, a lot of expenses along the way. And when someone gets knocked out the way that he did against Chidi and Njokuani, where the ref kind of did spare him a little bit as well, normally people are taking 4 to 6 months off before fighting again. So this goes back to the idea, he needs the money. Now there's nothing wrong with that. Do what you got to do to provide for yourself and your family. Unfortunately, he's got a nightmarish matchup against Jourdain Wright, who's going to be throwing bombs for that first 5 minutes. And historically, Marc-Andre Barriault's been pretty hittable, and he isn't the biggest puncher himself. So I really do expect him to struggle with the speed and power of Jourdain Wright, especially in the opening round. Now Jourdain Wright is a bit of a glass cannon. He doesn't take a punch very well, and he really does become more and more of a defensive liability the longer the fight goes on. So if Barriault can weather that initial storm, he'll have a chance to take the Beverly Hills Ninja out later, but I think that Jourdain Wright's going to be able to put him away before he has the chance to do that. So the pick for this fight is Jourdain Wright by knockout. Next at 8,500, we have Charles Jourdain. He's fighting groovy Lando Vannata this week in a fight that probably ends up being fight of the night with the way these guys throw down. I picked against Jourdain in his last fight against Andre Ewell, thinking that Ewell had the boxing and the length to be able to win rounds, but ultimately it was a beautiful display of ass kickery from Jourdain, who has had a pretty up and down career in the UFC at 3-3-1. But he has had some great moments. He's also had some disappointing moments. But what I like about Jourdain is his underrated power, even in his losses. You look at his loss against Julian Erosa, Andre Fili, he's still scoring knockdowns. And he has knockout wins over tough guys like Duho Choi and Marcelo Rojo. But his issue is that he does struggle with takedown defense, and I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle for him to get over this week. And that's also why I think that Lando Vannata wins this fight. We know that Lando Vannata can strike with anybody and make it a fun, competitive fight on the feet. Now he's at 145 pounds, which makes more sense for his frame, and he's a much better wrestler than Charles Jourdain is. He's still at Jackson Wink, so you should expect them to come in with a good game plan where he finds takedowns to steal him rounds. Think back to last week with Bilal Muhammad. When the clock hit around 2 to 2.5 minutes, he was getting a takedown every time. But he applied an intelligent game plan, and I think we see something similar to Lando Vannata this week, where he secures takedowns where he needs to and mixes it up on the feet, but he's not necessarily losing the striking exchanges. And Lando Vannata has had a pretty similar career to Charles Jourdain in terms of what the result is. He's got a lot of close fights. He has wins, losses, draws, it's roughly around the same. The biggest difference between the two is that Lando Vannata has fought the tougher competition up a weight class, so I think that he's going to have a much easier time with Charles Jourdain this week, and I expect him to win a decision. Right now, Lando Vannata by decision is plus 250. Not bad. From a DraftKings perspective, it's going to be tough to want to get to Vannata just because a decision win could score him 75, 55, 68 points, and that really doesn't get you there. So from a DraftKings perspective, I'm probably staying away, but the pick for me for this fight is Lando Vannata by decision. Next at 8,400, we have Marcin Prachnio. He's going to be fighting Felipe Lins, who's coming down from heavyweight. Prachnio is riding a 2-fight winning streak, surprisingly outstriking Khalil Roundtree and unsurprisingly knocking out Ike Villanueva. Prachnio historically has a kill or be killed kind of style. He has 11 knockout wins and 4 knockout losses. 3 of them have come in the UFC, as you can see there. Prachnio has a kill or be killed kind of style. He has 11 knockouts, 4 knockout losses, And the same could be said for Felipe Lins. He's either getting a finish or getting finished in most of his fights. So I really don't expect this fight to go the distance, and you're probably going to need this one on DraftKings because there's going to be a finish on one side or the other. My mind could change on this later in the week, but for right now, I like Marcin Prachnio to get the TKO at some point in this fight. He throws a lot of strikes. We've seen at times Felipe Lins be a little bit flat-footed, and Prachnio has momentum right now. I think if Felipe Lins were to get knocked out in this fight or to get finished in this fight, we probably wouldn't see him in the UFC again. So whenever you have somebody with their back against the wall like that, it's hard for me to back them with any kind of confidence. So the pick for me for this fight is Marcin Prachnio inside the distance. Next at 8,300, we have Sergey Khandozhko. He's going to be fighting Dwight Grant this week. I'm very low on Dwight Grant, I'll tell you that now. Dwight Grant is old, he doesn't have a good gas tank, he wings punches that are very sloppy, and his punching power is very overrated. He's one of these guys that scored a couple of knockouts a few years ago, and now it's like he's this murderous power puncher. He's not. Sergey Khandozhko, on the other side, really isn't that guy either. He's not the most dangerous guy. This fight probably goes decision, but I don't see Dwight Grant at this point in his career winning any more decisions. And Khandozhko is going to be the much more willing grappler, so if he's able to put a pace on Dwight Grant, take him down once or twice, I think Grant is going to be absolutely cooked, and I think Sergey is going to be able to ride to an easy decision. So the pick for me for this fight is Sergey Khandozhko by decision. Next at 8,200, we have the legend Clay Guida, the Carpenter. He's fighting Claudio Puelles this week. I do not bet on Clay Guida. I'm telling you that now. He's very hittable, and that doesn't mean that I think he's going to get knocked out, but he gets hit a lot, and that doesn't look good from a judging standpoint. And he's a solid wrestler. He's probably going to look to take Puelles down, but Puelles is a decent grappler. If you remember, he actually out-grappled Jourdain Levitt not too long ago. Clay Guida was getting absolutely smoked in his last fight before Santos mortally gassed, and Clay Guida was able to get his submission in there, choke him out. But I mean, that's kind of flash in the pan stuff. I don't see him getting a finish anytime soon. I probably think that he's going to fight, who knows, maybe 4, 5, 6 more times in the UFC. He still looks good. He's still competitive, but he's not finishing guys. And Claudio Puelles really isn't finishing guys like that either. I expect Claudio Puelles to get the decision win in this spot. I think the over in this fight is your safer bet, but I think grappling Puelles is going to be at a slight advantage. I think he might be able to execute some sweeps, some reversals, or just take Guida down himself. I just don't see Clay Guida winning this fight. So give me the much younger man, give me Claudio Puelles by decision, and honestly, if he is able to rack up some control time like he did against Jourdain Levitt, like he did against Chris Grutzmacher, then he's going to post a solid score and definitely pay off this $8,000 price tag. One of my more confident plays of the week is Claudio Puelles, and he's also worth a straight bet if you have the opportunity to. Now, I'll quickly get into these plays with you below 8,000, but if you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I mean, if you haven't subscribed, what are you doing? So quickly we'll look, I've got Dwight Grant at 7,900. I am really not interested in playing Dwight Grant at all. Felipe Lins, what I will say about Felipe Lins is that he's coming down from heavyweight, and I do like that. I do like that change because at heavyweight, he just physically didn't look the part. He wasn't exactly Chris Barnett, but he was definitely bigger than he needs to be in terms of his fighting weight. And I think that those physical disadvantages that he had up a weight class are the reason why he started out 0-2 in the UFC. I mean, he fought Andrei Arlovski. That's a tough draw for a guy making his debut. And Tanner Boser is decent. Tanner Boser kind of dipped out on us this week, but I don't think that Felipe Lins is completely outgunned here. You might want to see how he looks on the scales. Again, my mind might change on this fight later in the week. I already have a bet on Prachnio, but I could still place one on Felipe Lins. I could still talk myself into that. So my mind may change later in the week. Decent value on Lins if he wins, because it's probably going to be by way of knockout. Lando Vannata, I expect Lando Vannata to win this fight. I do expect him to get the takedowns when he needs to. And honestly, he might score better than what he has in the past in DraftKings, because at this price, how much do you need from him? Maybe 85, 90 points. He hasn't really gotten there often, so it's hard for me to tell you to pick him with any kind of confidence. From a straight betting perspective, though, Lando Vannata by decision at plus 250, the guy goes the distance a lot. So I think the better fighter is down here at 7,700. Charles Jourdain is younger, so he might be making some improvements that Lando Vannata might not be. Like his progression rate might be a little bit faster at this stage in their careers. But Lando Vannata years ago said that he tried to make 145 and he almost died. And in his last fight, he did it no problem, and he's going to do it again. So I think that he's made the requisite adjustments, or as John Anik would say, the wholesale changes to be able to get his body to where it needs to be so that he can compete comfortably in this weight class. And I do like him down here. I think this is a better home for him. Jourdain Wright by knockout. I don't know what the line is. I'll give it to you in the final picks video, but I expect him to get the knockout win. He's extremely up and down, right? Kill or be killed. You're probably going to need one side of it, but he lost to Bruno Silva in a fight where he was rocking Silva. Knocks out Jamie Pickett, who is notoriously tough. Gets knocked out by Joaquin Buckley. No shame in that. It happens to a lot of people. And he gets the KO win over Ike Villanueva, which, I mean, who doesn't? Mudaerji, I think that he's a little outgunned here. I don't think that he's going to be able to strike with Kape, and I think that if he starts shooting for takedowns, he's going to be in a world of hurt with that big boy on top of him. Amanda Lemos, again, I think that Amanda Lemos might be able to spark Jessica Andrade, just surprise her with one of those long straight punches. Not quite what she did to Montserrat Conejo a couple years ago, where I don't know if you remember that fight, but Conejo's closing distance, boom, just a perfect punch that drops her, has her flying through the air. It was one shot. Ruiz got right back up, or Conejo got right back up, but she was done. And you might look at this last fight against Angela Hill and say, well, I think that Angela Hill won the last 2 rounds, or at least it was close, but Angela Hill's always in close fights. Always. She also was in a close fight with Jessica Andrade a couple of years ago. So don't sleep on Angela Hill. She's giving anybody in this division a tough fight. It just, the judges hate Angela Hill. Montana De La Rosa, I think physically she's a little outgunned here. I think she's going up against a powerhouse in Maycee Barber, who's probably getting much better. She's still very young. I think she's, 23, 24 years old. So I like Maycee Barber in this spot. I think the over is probably your best bet. That does sit at minus 255. So if you wanted to parlay that with another round prop to kind of sweeten the deal a little bit, I think that makes sense. Cameron Else, listen, if Cameron Else wins, it's in the first round. He could totally go out there and spark a Qileng, find that first round finish that we would need, and at this price, he would break the slate entirely, but we know that a Qileng is notoriously pretty tough. Cameron Else outside of the first round is offering nothing. So it's hard for me to back him with any kind of confidence. Like, endurance is one of the biggest indicators of who's going to win when it comes to MMA. So I can't get here. I can't tell you to play this guy. But if you do, you're hoping for that first round finish. No, thank you. So Mike Jackson, the truth. The truth is he's going to get knocked out in the first round. So those are my picks. Sprint to your sports books. Start throwing your lineups together. Send me DMs on Twitter of your lineups and tell me what should I do. I love it. Comment what you think about this slate coming up. Sorry for the delay. We had a couple of logistical issues throughout the week, but make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. That way I can bring more of this to you.